My name is Serena Chapman, and today we will be looking at human sex trafficking and research and study that was conducted on this specific issue. Now, let's start with human sex trafficking and some concepts and factors that has been found throughout U.S. history and international history regarding human sex trafficking. So what we find is that human sex trafficking is not a new phenomenon. This has not been an issue that has started in the past recent years, but this has been an issue that has been going on for many years, for many decades, for many centuries. We see that human sex trafficking was used for exploitation of human bodies and even for punishment in other countries where laws allowed it to be. In the United States, we commonly see human trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking in the transatlantic slave trade. The concept of transatlantic slave trade was to steal human beings, Africans, from their homes in Africa and bring them to the new land, what is now called North America, to work in inhumane conditions where they were not getting paid. They were being separated from their families and being killed if they did not fulfill whatever it is they had to fulfill for that day. Sex trafficking, it continues today by traffickers who make a huge profit off of selling other human beings. The structures of sex trafficking have killed many men, women, and children for decades. Victims are sold into this expansive business to be trafficked for months and sometimes for years. According to Polar's Project, traffickers exploit people vulnerabilities by offering a high-paying job or a loving relationship that individual may have been looking for all their life, or an exciting opportunity such as modeling gig or something of that nature. And this, among other factors such as fraud, is used to force and coerce people into sex trafficking. When we look at fraud being used to exploit other people into the business of sex trafficking, usually the story goes like this. An individual may have this grand opportunity for this individual to have a modeling gig. And what the trafficker would do is have this person all excited about this new opportunity, and then a couple weeks down the line, the trafficker might say something of the nature that this person owes them money for them to travel and do things so that they can really get their modeling career going. And what ends up happening is that this trafficker gets this person into the business of sex trafficking, and usually they are stuck in this business continuous model for years and decades, with this individual not being seen as a human being anymore, but as a commodity. We see that human sex trafficking and those involved in sex trafficking, and specifically the traffickers, must be manipulative in order to gain the supply, which is the victims, and meet the demand of the Johns. According to Share Hope International, the John is the individual who pays for or trades something of value for sexual acts to receive from the victims that the trafficker has in his or her possession. The Johns, who also can be women, men, or even children, meet the demand for sex trafficking that makes this business so profitable and been able to expand for years and years and years inside of the United States and outside of the United States. Previous research suggests that those concepts, supply and demand, are the fundamental aspects of a sex trafficking business. Now, let's look at some of the methods that were used in this research. In this research, survivor stories from Equality Now website and World Without Exploitation website were used for a content analysis. The survivor stories were coded using those elements of supply and demand as variables to answer this specific question. What are the experiences that survivors are involved in when they were in sex trafficking that constitutes sex trafficking as an innovative business. This study examined 14 survivor stories, 7 from Equality Now website and the other 7 from World Without Exploitation. These stories included 50 females and only 1 male. These stories also were strategically chosen on each website by how much information was revealed and each survivor's experiences in sex trafficking. This was done to provide adequate information in regards to supply and demand. Also, most of the stories on the Equality Now website were those of individuals who were trafficked outside of the United States. At the World Without Exploitation website, most of these survivor stories were recorded inside of the United States. The supply variable examined the background and characteristics of the survivors. The demand variable examined how often the survivors were trafficked and whether there were strong laws against trafficking that might decrease the demand. Now let's move on to the results from the methods. In the coded survivor stories, it was affirmed continuously that there was a foundation of trust between the victim and the trafficker. The recruitment strategies range from a family member, boyfriend, friend, or acquaintance that was using force, coercion, or even fraud to ensnare their victims into sex trafficking, and even making the victims feel that it was their life destiny to be involved in sex trafficking. In all, what we have seen is that the traffickers have better access to the victims when they already have built trust with their victims. We saw that in the coded stories where 69% of the victims had already known their traffickers previously before they were ensnared into this business. We know that trafficker not only recruits men and women who are adults, but they also recruit children and younger adults. In this study, we saw in the coded stories that the survivors, when they were victims, they were trafficked at a young age, at the age of 15. That was the median age. Also, traffickers precisely chose their victims due to the vulnerabilities that these victims had. And so some of those vulnerabilities that we saw in the stories were that these survivors, when they were young, they had terrible home lives where the mom and the father were not in the home, or maybe the mother and father were in the home, but there was a lot of child neglect going on, or a lot of child abuse that was in that home. Or this was just a person who moved to a new state or new city or new country and they were looking for opportunities. Or it was also that this person thought that this individual was their lifetime lover, but it ended up being their trafficker. The traffickers, they exploited these factors, and this is what keeps sex trafficking as an innovative business. People are always going to have some sort of vulnerabilities, and if they cannot accurately find solutions on dealing with those vulnerabilities, people can come into their lives and exploit them and use them for no good. This study also focused more on the supply variable than on the demand variable. This ended up being a limitation for the study because it did not accurately explain why individuals decide to purchase sex. But what we did learn is a lot about the supply, which is the victims, and some of the characteristics they possess, such as their vulnerabilities and age and location. And in many of the countries outside of the U.S., we saw that there were no laws against trafficking human beings, and it was legal for that to happen. In conclusion, we learned that traffickers exploiting other vulnerabilities are the reason why sex trafficking has continued to be an innovative business. What we learned is that sex trafficking is often seen like a victimless crime, when in reality, it is an exploitation of another human being. Children, men, women, and even the trafficker themselves, who can also be a man or a woman or a child, have all been affected by this human rights issue at some point in their life. Spreading awareness to look out for suspicious activity of trafficking in our daily lives should be a necessity. We see that truckers who are on the road for hours have made this a necessity. They have developed a coalition that is called Truckers Against Trafficking, where the truckers commit to looking out for any suspicious activity of trafficking and immediately reporting that to law enforcement. If we continue to do this, I believe that the demand for human beings will go down and trafficking will be eliminated. Thank you.